Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good day, everyone.
I'd just like to welcome you all to this wonderful venue. Here we are in British Columbia, and I would like to thank our friends from back east for bringing their weather here overnight. I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered on Coast Salish territory of the Musqueam Indian Band, the Tsleil-Waututh First Nation, and the Squamish First Nation. I'd also like to acknowledge some people that we have in the room today that are participating in the official launch of the CPTPP, and that would include Dan Rumi, Member of Parliament for Pitt Meadows. We have a number of foreign representatives, including Amit Chara, who's the Investment Director for the Australia Trade and Investment Commission, the Consul General for Chile. We have the Ambassador to Japan, Sakani. We also have the Consul General for Mexico. We have representation from New Zealand, representation from Vietnam, and a good group of people here that are really participating in an event that I think is an excellent way of acknowledging the importance of a fundamental agreement for our future economic security. I know we are engaging in a very informative session, and the fact that we have such a large attendance reinforces the point that trade diversification is key to our success going forward. My name is Stuart Beck. I'm the President and CEO of the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. APFC Canada is a leading organization on catalyzing engagement between Canada and Asia. We are dedicated to strengthening ties between this country and that part of the world, with a focus on expanding economic relations through trade, investment, collaboration, and innovation. As many of you know, in October of 2018, Canada became one of the first 6 countries to ratify the CPTPP. And the deal came into force on December 30th, 2018. And I'd just like to recognize the fact and applaud again the government for moving it so quickly. So it's an amazing feat. It doesn't happen very often, and for that you deserve a lot of credit, ministers. Canada is one of the first 6 signatories to the deal, which allows us first mover advantage to a market that represents 500 million consumers and a combined GDP that constitutes 15.4% of global trade. This deal will reshape the rules of trade in the region and open up remarkable opportunities for Canadian business, in particular our SMEs. Many here today represent that core group of companies that will be doing the business in the region. Regrettably, growing inequality around the world has fueled the rise of anti-trade, anti-globalist rhetoric. In signing on to the CPTPP, Canada recognizes the need to adjust to new global challenges and has stepped up as a pioneer in the promotion of a progressive trade agenda, hence the term comprehensive and progressive. Thank you, Canada. One of the things the Asia Pacific Foundation does every 2 years is a national opinion poll that takes the temperature of Canada-Asia relations. In 2018, our national opinion poll indicated strong public support in Canada for increased trade agreements in the Asia-Pacific region. More than half of all Canadians agreed that in 10 years, trade with Asia will outweigh trade with the United States, and that with more investment from Asia, that will only be beneficial to Canada. The poll conducted shortly after the conclusion of CPTPP also suggests strong public support for the deal. 78% of Canadians say they support the agreement. The show of force in this room is a testament to the importance of this deal for our country. With educational outreach like we see here today, we hope that all of you will be able to take full advantage of what the agreement has to offer. And as you see the benefits to your business growth, that national support will only rise. I think it's important that we acknowledge that while trade architecture provides the foundational framework for Canada to continue engaging with the Asia-Pacific, Today's knowledge-based economies are dependent on talent. That is people, more than anything else. Which is why APF Canada strongly advocates for Canada as an international talent hub and the need to support the development, acquisition, and retention of Asia competence. By Asia competence, I mean building Canadian understanding how to do business in Asia and providing young Canadians with the skills and knowledge they will need to thrive in the new global economy. It's sessions like this, but also work-study programs that permit our young people the opportunity to experience Asia firsthand. That will keep Canada competitive. These are the people that we need to help that trade diversification agenda actually happen. So this is a really informative and welcome session. I thank Global Affairs Canada for being the catalyst in having this program going across the country. This is the launch and start in Vancouver. For those of us from Vancouver, it makes sense, start from west to east. But they go from here across the country to all the major cities with the same purpose of educating Canadian business on the advantages of this excellent agreement. So now, I'd like to invite Minister George Chow, who's the Minister of State for Trade, Minister of State for Trade for the Government of British Columbia, to share a few remarks. Minister Chow is the MLA for Vancouver Fairview and served 2 terms on the Vancouver City Council from 2005 to 2011. Minister Chow has had a 30-year career with BC Hydro as well. Minister Chow, would you like to join us?
Thank you, Stuart, and good morning, everyone. This is a slight correction. I'm the MLA for Vancouver Fraserville. They often mix me up with Vancouver Fairview because the name is very close. And also, the other member is George Heyman, so we also share the same first name. So George Chow, George Heyman, Fraserville, Fairview. But anyways, I'm also the Minister of State for Trade, and I'd like to welcome everyone to be here. It's very, very exciting. You know, the room is full. I understand there are 500 people registered for this informal seminar. And I also would like to echo Stuart's comment that we are on the traditional territory of the Squamish and the Musqueam and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. And of course, I bring greetings to you right here in the Vancouver Convention Center from our Premier, John Horgan, and as well as our Minister of Jobs, Trade and Technology, Minister Bruce Ralston, who could not be with us here today. And so I'm also very happy to be able to meet the 3 federal ministers who will be sharing this stage, sharing this important seminar with you. Minister Wilkinson, you know, fellow British Columbian. Minister Carr, whom I met in Prince George last year at the Natural Resources Conference, and Minister Champagne as well. And we talked extensively on the phone. And I also like to acknowledge our ambassador, Ambassador Canada to Japan, Mr. Ian Burney, who's here. And also the Ambassador of Japan to Canada, Mr. Kimihiro Ishikani. Thank you for coming. And I'd like to also thank Global Affairs for arranging this event and inviting us, the provincial government, to welcome everyone to this important seminar to talk about the Comprehensive Progressive Agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnerships. So now I'm used to reading paper, but now I have to read the iPad, so that's to find this. So, it's okay. It's interesting as an engineer, we still like paper, but anyway, that's because we produce a lot in this province here, yeah. Well, you know, as the province in the, on the western part of Canada and on the Pacific Rim. I mean, we are the gateway to the Pacific Rim, and I think we'll be, as a province, gain a lot from this CPTPP. This is actually interesting because when I was talking to another minister, and she was pronouncing CPTPP in French, it sounds so much better, but I couldn't say it. So our strategic location provides reliable access to the markets across the Pacific Rim, and now that this CPTPP has come into force, I think we'll be very happy to talk about trade. And of course, we have a trade agreement with Mexico as well as other nations. But here, we now have 7 nations who are signing on this CPTPP. So as the other nations will be signing on, and I think this would be very, very exciting for us. And we have Australia now, Japan, New Zealand, Singapore, and Vietnam, of course, including Canada. So we have seven nations. So it's, in this uncertain time, it's important to embrace trade diversification. And one of the things about our trade relationship is we also have our 3rd largest trading partner for British Columbia, Japan, just right across from the Pacific, and being also the 3rd largest economy in the world, that it's one of our important partners in the CPTPP. So we look forward to building a very mutually beneficial trade relationship with all the countries, and like I just mentioned with Japan. And this will open opportunity right across different sectors for us and increase the commitment to free and fair trade for all government involved. And we recognize the incredible potential trade and investment generates for British Columbia, and it will help us to achieve prosperous future from community across the province in order to create good jobs and good opportunity for all British Columbians and Canadians as well. And as far as our trade office, we have trade investment representative located across the world in 17 regions and 65 offices. And our trade representative identify new business opportunity, support trade events and mission, and make connections with strategic partners. And right here in British Columbia, and we have a trade readiness and service team right here today as well. So during the seminar, you're free to talk to us, and we could help you what we can in terms of export. And also, of course, our trade investment office is overseas. One of the main missions is to attract investment into British Columbia and Canada. So our job is to accelerate opportunity for BC exports and to help the business overcome export barriers. And so I encourage you to take in the seminar and talk to our representative. And I thank you for the opportunity to be here today and to talk with you. And right now, the weather is great. The snow will be flying at 6 p.m. And thank you very much.
Well, Minister, one of those things I learned with an iPad is it times out. It's very inconvenient when you're going through the middle of the speech, so I can understand and appreciate. And thank you very much for those words in terms of what BC and what the BC government can do for companies looking to do business in Asia as part of the CPTPP. Now, we'd like to, before we go into other speeches from our ministers, we just want to show a quick video on the CPTPP, and if we can launch them, please do. They're on this screen here and that screen there. Thank you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, who is a Minister for Fisheries, Oceans, and the Canadian Coast Guard. Minister Wilkinson spent more than 20 years in the private sector and held leadership positions with a number of companies dedicated to the development of green technologies. And I know I got to get his riding correct because he's my MP. So his riding is North Vancouver, and so Minister Wilkinson, please join us on the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Je suis très heureux d'être ici.
I'm very happy to be here today with you all.
Yes, my riding is North Vancouver. If you look out that window right there, that is my riding. When I first was elected to the House of Commons just 3.5 years ago, in all of us who are members get up to make our maiden speeches in the House. And I didn't realize that you're actually not supposed to describe your riding in glowing terms, so I actually got up and said, I come from the most beautiful riding in all of Canada, and everybody booed. But I would say that British Columbia is certainly a very beautiful part of Canada, and I would say that North Vancouver is certainly one of the places in British Columbia that is incredibly spectacular. I'm very happy to be here with all of you today, and certainly a very warm welcome to all of the honored guests that are with us, to Minister Chow, and certainly to my colleagues who have joined us here in British Columbia today, who you will be hearing from in a couple of minutes. From cutting-edge technology to world-class agricultural products, a thriving fish and seafood sector, to the largest and most prolific of Canada's ports, British Columbian businesses have a great deal to offer. Trade with the rest of the world has long been extremely important for a country like Canada. As the pace of change accelerates, as human capital becomes an increasingly important driver of prosperity and growth, and as scale continues to play a dominant role in the success of many industries, the ability to trade freely with countries around the world becomes ever more important. This is precisely why this federal government has made trade, both stability of existing arrangements and the development of access to new markets, a centerpiece of its economic strategy. As somebody who worked in the BC business community for many years prior to entering politics, I, as all of you, am very well aware of the importance of trade and of trade diversification. Those of us on the West Coast, I think, are particularly aware of the opportunities that are offered by the rapidly growing economies in Asia. The CPTPP will provide opportunities to businesses in British Columbia and across the country to improve their connectivity and take their innovation and skills global. This includes small and medium-sized enterprises who will be able to link to global supply chains, multinationals, and global infrastructure projects. I would be remiss if, as Federal Fisheries Minister, I did not talk a little bit about the benefits that free trade has on Canada's important fish and seafood sector. Canada's seafood sector exports almost $7 billion annually in fish and seafood products around the world and provides over 76,000 jobs to Canadians from coast to coast to coast. Ours is a seafood and fishing industry with an international reputation for high-quality, sustainably sourced products. Once the CPTPP is fully implemented, 100% of fish and seafood tariff lines will be duty-free for all signatories. I should also note that in addition to the economic importance of this agreement to the fish and seafood sector, it will also generate significant environmental benefits. Through the development of the CPTPP, Canada stressed the importance of sustainable fisheries, aquaculture, and healthy and productive aquatic ecosystems, while growing our fish export market opportunities, and a commitment to sustainability was included in the final text of the agreement. Successful economies in the modern world will be those that harness the resources at their disposal to create products and services of value, and that find and develop market opportunities for these products. The Government of Canada, with special credit to my Cabinet colleagues who will join the stage today, has recognized this, and through the CPTPP has taken a major step forward. I certainly look forward to watching all of the business leaders in this room as they move to seize the opportunities to help drive economic growth, innovation, and Canadian prosperity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Wilkinson, and it really gives me a lots of pleasure to introduce our next minister, Minister Champagne, François-Philippe Champagne. I spent 32 years in the Canadian Foreign Service as a trade commissioner, and I'm very proud to say that first and foremost I was a trade commissioner. And I worked with a number of ministers, but unfortunately the two that I didn't work with are sitting in front of us today because I'd already retired by that time. But I did have the pleasure of meeting, and I'm going off script a little bit, I'm sorry, but it's nice to be able to introduce people that you know and have worked with. And so I had the pleasure of working with Minister Champagne as Minister of International Trade. He's now Minister for Infrastructure, and you just have to turn around and take a look at the port behind you, and that's a fundamental piece of Canadian infrastructure that drives a lot of what's going to happen with CPTPP. Minister Champagne and I were standing, or actually we were in the lounge together in Seoul just before the completion of the CPTPP in Da Nang in Vietnam, and we had a good chance to talk about this, and he said, Stuart, the foundation has to promote CPTPP. I said, Minister, it's part of our DNA. Absolutely, we'll be doing something like this. And so for me, it's kind of going full circle to be standing here in front of you today with both former Minister of International Trade, our current Minister of International Trade, for something that's so fundamental, so important. So Minister Champagne, I know you're the infrastructure minister, but you have some fingerprints on this agreement, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. I know infrastructure is really critical for our future in Canada, and if we can't build it, we can't serve the markets where we want to trade for trade diversification. So Minister Champagne, please. Oh, he's Minister from Shawinigan, if I'm not remember. Shawinigan, just so I get that correct, that we're in the right place.
Well, let me put the microphone to the right spot now. Good morning, everyone. Morning. Isn't that great to be here today, huh, Stuart? This is quite extraordinary for many of us today to be here. This is not only a great event, but it's also an event that for many, many of us, and this is like a family reunion just with a bit more cousins, I guess, brings back very, very fond memories of times when we were looking at that. In fact, I mean, what we're celebrating today, because today is really, in my view, a great celebration, is that TPP mark a new chapter in the relationship between Canada and obviously the Asia-Pacific nation. Just think about that for a minute. I mean, Minister Wilkinson was talking about the great view that we have. But just for a minute, Canada was one of the nations who was key, and I would say with our friends from Japan, to write the rules of trade in Asia-Pacific. This is quite an accomplishment, I would say, as Canadians, that we've been able to be there to provide modern trading rules in the Asia-Pacific region. And now is obviously my job as Minister of Infrastructure to make sure that we have the infrastructure of the 21st century to make sure that our goods are moving to market and that you can all benefit, obviously, from these new trade agreements. So let me just say a few words about, obviously, Minister Wilkinson, thank you for hosting us here in beautiful Vancouver. It's true, we brought a bit of snow from Quebec, but it won't last for long. You can just remember, for us, it's until June, so it's nothing for you, I would say. Danny, it's good to be with you, Dan, to be in Vancouver. And obviously, my great friend, Minister Carr, you know, we are kind of the bridge between the trade and the infrastructure. We were saying that this morning as we were touring the Port of Vancouver. Minister from the Vancouver, the BC government, it's great to be seeing you again. Ambassador Bernie, you're just here. How many memories do we have together? I'm sure that's going to be for the book. Ambassador Ishikane from Japan, thank you for being with us today. It's always a pleasure, and it's probably with you that I spend most time in Ottawa anyway, so it's great to see you. And the Trade Commissioner, and obviously Stuart Beck, who's a great leader in that. I won't do the same acknowledgement. We have acknowledged, obviously, we are on the traditional land, and obviously we do that with a lot of respect. But you can imagine, I am very, that's what the speech said, but let me add, very, very, very happy to be here today with Minister Carr to celebrate the entry into force of our deal with the Pacific Rim's nation, which we call the CPTPP. And you're right, Canada was very much part of the name of CPTPP, and I think it stands for comprehensive and progressive, and I think it was important to say that. We fought hard for this deal to happen, and thanks to all our effort collectively, this is a reality for Canadians. As you all know, being here in Vancouver, our ports in British Columbia are the vital gateways to the important Asian markets. I mean, when you live in Vancouver, where you're from BC, you understand that better than many others in our country. If the Asia-Pacific trade deal is the bridge to dynamic and growing markets like Japan and others, and we have, Stuart mentioned all the countries which have signed and those which have ratified, this is often where the journey of products for many Canadians, businesses, and entrepreneurs begins. Nos ports en Colombie-Britannique sont des points d'entrée vitaux.
Our ports in British Columbia are important gateways to important Asian markets. This means that we have a bridge to important markets, growing markets, dynamic markets, and it's often here that the exports of products begin for many companies and many Canadian entrepreneurs.
Partners account for about 500 million consumers. And if you just think for a moment again, think about the opportunity that this represents for small and medium-sized businesses, not only in British Columbia, but obviously across our country. I spent a good part of my life in international businesses in Canada and abroad, and I understand very clearly the importance of trade diversification and the important role, I would say, that Minister Carr is playing in Canada in building the growth not only for today, for tomorrow. I often say Minister Carr and I share a lot because when you talk about infrastructure, you have to look at decades. Well, it's about the same thing when you're looking at trades. You're signing the trade agreement for today, but by doing so, you're ensuring prosperity, not only for this generation, but obviously for future generations. And British Columbians already have the advantage of a strong focus towards Asia. You know better than many all the opportunities of the Asian market. And that's why, as Minister of Infrastructure, I'm so pleased to be here, because in my previous role on behalf of Canadian businesses with Stuart and many of you and the trade commissioners, which are an amazing resources, I saw firsthand how Canadian products and services are warmly received to Asia Pacific. In fact, I would put it to you, Brand Canada has never been stronger around the world, not only in Asia Pacific, but I would say around the world. Trade and investment, we know, create jobs and build strong connections between countries, but above all, people. Because it's people who make the trade. It's the entrepreneurs who go there. It's the innovator. It's the student. It's the researcher who are going to make this great relationship. And I would say the presence of so many ambassadors today is a great testament how this relationship is important not only for Canada, but obviously for the Asia-Pacific nation. And I would be remiss, just like you said, Jonathan, not to highlight our ambassador to Japan, Jan Berne, and the Japanese ambassador to Canada, Ambassador Ishikane, for the key role they played in bringing our two nations together. We had a lot of discussion, but you two, I must say, in the history, you will be remembered for the role you played in bringing our two nations together so that we can all benefit. So the more bridge we build, the more opportunities there are for goods, for services, and obviously for people to cross them. And in turn, having the best infrastructure boosts trade and drives innovation, which in turn will create a job and expand the Canadian economy. I often say that trade is probably, not trade, but infrastructure is probably the best way to attract talent and investment. We know it. Most of you have traveled around the world. We know cities and we know provinces and territory and states where infrastructure is there and it's allowing the free flow of people and movement. That's the place where people want to invest. Which brings me to obviously my role as the infrastructure minister. You know what Margaret Thatcher said on this topic, and I won't try to replicate her accent, although I live in London. After all, I come from Shawinigan. You and I come by road or rail, but economists travel on infrastructure. The point is that infrastructure is a long word for the support that underpins everything. It's a bit like the spinal cord in our nation to make sure that we ensure the success of each and every Canadian. We have the trade deals. We have the diversification momentum thanks to Minister Carr. But now what we need to build is the high-quality infrastructure that will allow Canadians to sell their goods and services. By improving our roads and airports, Canadian benefits from shorter travel times, better traffic flow, and obviously improved safety. And thanks to Minister Carr, our ambitious export diversification strategy will invest above $1 billion over 6 years to build our strategic trade infrastructure. And this morning, we're just in the Port of Vancouver looking at not only what they do today, but what they're looking for the future and how amazing this is going to be a gateway and a hub, obviously, for not only Canada, but for North America and the expansion and the projects that they have. So investment are already helping improve our roads and obviously our infrastructure. To give you an example, we are investing $167 million for 3 projects making improvements to port infrastructure. And we are obviously also improving the rail capacity because Stuart and all of you would know it's not only good to be able to put the containers on the ship, but we need to have a seamless process to our gateways. That's why we call them our trade corridors. And thanks to our Prime Minister, we saw that from our first budget in 2016 that we needed to invest in our trade corridor, and that's what we're going to continue, obviously, to do. And we're not only doing that here in Vancouver, but I would say our investment are also contributing to the health and also the benefits of communities in rural, northern, and indigenous communities. I was just there a few months ago opening the Port of Prince Rupert, for example, which is also another great gateway to the Asia-Pacific. So obviously, we are committed to improve the trade and transportation corridor because we understand better than anyone that with what Minister Carr is doing, the real bridge is infrastructure. You need to make sure that you move your goods, and that's why we also invested in airport like in Nanaimo and the Kicking Horse Canyon project. But we also welcome the private sector in our investment, and you all know that the private sector will help us to do faster and more to open our trade corridor. And Canada, as you know, in a world fraught with uncertainty, is becoming, I would say, a beacon of stability, predictability, and the rule of law. A country which opens its border, which cherishes diversity and an inclusive society. Most of the investors that Minister Carr would get the call now cherish Canada. Many people call us and they say they want to be part of the story. They want to invest in infrastructure because they see Canada as basically this pivot in the world between Europe and Asia-Pacific. If you think that today we have preferential market access to more than 1.5 billion consumers, there's a lot for us to dream about and to build together. And that's why we will always continue to invest in infrastructure because we know that's one of the best ways to improve our competitiveness. In conclusion, when I stood at the Port of Montreal to launch our trade agreement with the European Union, I said, Canada can and will chart the course of 21st century prosperity. Well, I'm privileged to stand with you and Minister Carr and all my colleagues today to mark this great event. I would say in conclusion, seize the moment. There's never been a better time to be Canadian. There's never been a better time to promote Grand Canada in the world. I would say be ambitious. With close to 1.5 billion consumers, we are, as Canadians, having the chance to be ambitious in the market. And let's build together the 21st century infrastructure we need to bring these goods to market. Infrastructure which will be modern, resilient, and green. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, one thing Minister Champagne doesn't need is a cup of coffee in the morning.
I don't drink coffee.
Yeah. Before we have Minister Carr speak, we're going to show another video. I gather the minister was with a Canadian company yesterday in Vancouver who's going to benefit dramatically from CPTPP. The company is Biba Ventures.
My name is Matt Toner. I'm the CEO of Biba. Playgrounds haven't changed much in 100 years, but kids have really changed. So we think that this digital solution to enhance play, to get kids back outside and being social and being imaginative and playing with their families is an essential solution for young parents today. Having good local partners and a common understanding of how business needs to work is essential. Otherwise, it's just too big a jump into the unknown. We found a formula that works. We've had great local support and great support from the Trade Commissioner Service, and it's really changed our horizons. The CPTPP is an important multilateral agreement because I think we've grown accustomed to having liberal trade globally. And for a trading country like Canada, it's essential to our prosperity. So seeing an agreement like this come into effect, which gives us more predictability, more stability, and it also demonstrates international willingness to continue this agenda of better, more liberal trade, deeply reassuring. We've used the Trade Commissioner Service of Canada throughout our growth, I would say, simply because they're good, trusted advisors. They understand where we're coming from. For any Canadian company that wants to punch above its weight, it's an incredible resource. You know, it's important for Canadian companies to keep dreaming big and keep thinking big.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce Minister Carr. Again, I haven't had the pleasure of working with him as my minister when I was working in the Foreign Service, but I did have a chance to meet him in Delhi when I was working there. And Minister Carr at that point in time was with the Chamber of Commerce for, if I'm not mistaken, for Business Council of Manitoba. And I have to say he is a proud Manitoban to the point where I had dinner with him 2 weeks ago, I think, and in Ottawa, and we were talking about trade diversification. And of course, everybody had some sort of connection to Winnipeg. I'm trying to think, what is my connection to Winnipeg? I'm a Montrealer. Where is that connection? And I finally figured it out, Minister. My grandfather put the cables in for the trolley system in Winnipeg. So there's a picture of my grandfather, understandably wearing a raccoon coat down to the ground at the corner of Portage and Main, believe it or not. And so there is a connection. Everybody has a connection to Winnipeg, so I think it's important. But the minister is, prior to coming into this portfolio, and I'll talk a little bit about the portfolio in a second, but he was Minister for Natural Resources, and we also worked on that file in the capacity that I'm in right now. And I have to say the minister truly is a proponent for moving our resources, doing the things that need to be done. He organized a conference in Winnipeg in this issue, but how do we get together and really focus on what is the important elements of our success going forward in the context of our natural resources. Critical meeting, and you might even mention it in this talk, I don't know, but it's a very important element. But it's a team, it's always teamwork, so you can't do one thing without the other. So listening to Minister Champagne, knowing what he did in terms of negotiating the agreement, but it takes getting it through, and that, I tell you, is not an easy thing to do. For anybody who's had any experience moving treaties and agreements through the House of Commons and the Senate, and then getting them ratified, it's not an easy process. And the two of them together worked as a team, and I think it's really been quite fundamentally important to where we are today and sitting here and talking about this. But he's also now the Minister for Trade Diversification. And as a trade commissioner, 32 years, I started my trade commissioner career in the United States. I had 2 postings there. I was in Silicon Valley. I opened our office. I was in Miami. We at that point in time, 85% of our exports were going to the United States. We are heavily dependent. I was there at the time that we negotiated and ratified the free trade agreement and NAFTA. And in some ways, NAFTA was a crutch. It didn't allow us to really understand the importance of trade diversification. So the fact that they've now put trade diversification in the title of Minister Carr's portfolio, I think, is so fundamental, because it really gets people to think about what we need to do. Just to put things into perspective, our market share in the United States is declining. The United States market share in the world is declining. So we're heavily dependent on a market that's declining for us in many ways. And Asia, 44% of global GDP will be in Asia by 2020. 66% of the global middle class will be in Asia by 2030. So, Minister, you've got a really important job to do. I'm glad that you're doing it, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. You may know that I'm a Winnipegger. And if your grandfather was building the infrastructure for the electric trolley bus system many, many, many years ago, we are now back to the future, because these public transportation systems are going to be electric from now on. So your grandfather was a very wise man. And the fact that I'm a Winnipegger means that I do a lot of commuting from Winnipeg to Ottawa, where I work. So I go from cold to colder. I go from snow to snowier. I go from sleet to ice. So when I knew that I was going to get this great 40-hour break in Vancouver, I was so excited because as a student at the University of British Columbia a very long time ago, I remember suntanning in Lighthouse Park in mid-February. So I packed a bathing suit and shorts there in the drawer in the hotel room, but it's the most magnificent place, Jonathan, you're right. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world. And I want to say to my friend and colleague and partner, François-Philippe Champagne, that I feel as if I'm cheating a little bit because I'm harvesting what you planted. And your presence in the trade file at a time when we were negotiating all over the world has now become a platform upon which we are going to build growth and prosperity for Canadians. So on behalf of all of my colleagues, and especially myself, François-Philippe, thank you for all that you've done. I also want to just spend a few seconds remembering the life of Michael Wilson, who passed yesterday. And we remember him as a very senior minister in the Mulroney government who had an awful lot to do with negotiating free trade agreements. And I think it's particularly important at this moment and this place. We remember what Michael had accomplished as minister. He was a great Canadian. And also, at the same time, we talk about the land speed record that was broken when we passed the CPTPP in the House of Commons and through the Senate. I mean, literally, no one in modern Canadian political history can remember a bill that went through the Commons and the Senate faster than this one did. And the reason was because of the cooperation we had from the official opposition. And Ed Fast, who was the Conservative Minister of International Trade, who was there at the beginning. So this is an example of bipartisan cooperation that led to good things for our country. And it's worthwhile saying that the reason there was bilateral cooperation was because the people who elect us understand that trade agreements produce growth, and growth produces jobs. We love in Canada to talk about how we're going to distribute our wealth. You on this side of the room, you want more to go to education. You want more to go to infrastructure. You want more to go to hospitals. I want more to go to symphony orchestras. But who's creating the wealth? How much are we talking about the wealth that we can then distribute? And that's why trade is so important. And there's no place where it's more important than in Vancouver and in British Columbia. Vancouver has long been a gateway to the Asia-Pacific region. And this is where the Empress of Japan, a cruise ship launched in 1890 by Lady Alice Stanley, Lord Stanley's daughter, sailed between Canada and the east coast of Asia. That ship held the speed record for crossing the Pacific in 10 days, and her dragon figurehead has been preserved at the seawall in Stanley Park. And since that historic voyage, Canada and our friends in the Asia-Pacific region have come a long way in strengthening ties between our countries. And today's celebration is no less historic. It marks a remarkable step forward for all of us. I also want to acknowledge and welcome some other distinguished guests who are here. His Excellency Kimihiro Ishikani of Japan, Canada's ambassador to Japan, Ian Burney, former Minister of Trade out Fast, who was going to be here, and I talked about him, and many of the negotiators who represented Canada as we developed this agreement. And I want to thank everyone in the room for coming here this morning for this celebration, a celebration that I think will have an historic impact on the future of our country. So this is a great day for Vancouver, for British Columbia, and for Canada as we celebrate these important ties. Once fully implemented, you know, this deal will eliminate 99% of tariff lines on goods among Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Brunei, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, Peru, Singapore, and Vietnam. Canadian exporters can now access markets in those countries, and our Asia-Pacific Agreement could boost Canada's GDP by more than $4 billion. Canada was built on trade with other nations, and today our entrepreneurs compete alongside the best in the world. Sometimes it's best to tell these stories through the narrative of real life examples. Take Grace Kwan. She is the CEO of a small clean tech business called Hydrogen in Motion right here in Vancouver. She has a vision to deliver portable hydrogen tanks that will act like batteries for every person on the planet. Technology has developed enough that her company can market these flexible tanks around the world. To use Grace's line, this is a great line, we didn't get out of the Stone Age because we ran out of stones. We changed our behavior because of technology. Innovative Canadians such as Grace have a lot to offer the world, and new trade deals are the bridges, as Francois Philippe has said, to these opportunities. And the Asia-Pacific Agreement is one bridge that will enable the movement of people, goods, and services to be shared. But for that to happen, for the middle class to succeed, we need would-be exporters, like so many of the talented individuals in this room, from diverse backgrounds and walks of life to take advantage of the new links between their products and potential customers. And since being appointed Minister of International Trade Diversification by the Prime Minister, I've said many times that diversification is more than just tapping into new international markets. It's about tapping into deep wells of potential within our own borders, including women, Indigenous peoples, and other historically marginalized groups. Trade works best when everybody benefits, yet only 14.8% of women-owned enterprises export. And that's why we believe that there has never been a better time to emphasize getting small businesses and women into trade. It's also why we are invigorating the support services provided to first-time exporters. Our trade advocacy is concentrated on diversification because for our future prosperity, it makes good business sense to have access to new and thriving markets. And the Asia-Pacific is not the only one. In the last year and a half, we have signed the free trade agreement with the Europeans. We've now concluded NAFTA 2.0. We actually like to call it CUSMA because in Canada, Canada must come first. So it's the Canada-USA-Mexico agreement. Don't pay any attention to what the Americans are telling you. So, I don't know, was that a cheap applause line? It might have been. But you responded beautifully, I must say. So there are other examples. The one I like the most is that there is a company in Montreal that manufactures bicycles. And they just won an award to supply Barcelona with 7,000 bikes. Many of them are e-bikes, because within the Canada-European Trade Agreement, there is a procurement chapter that opens up competition to foreign companies, and the tariff went from 15% to 0. So without the agreement, there would have been no deal, and there would have been no opportunity for a Canadian company. So that is one example of how an agreement stimulates industry to look beyond the comfortable and the traditional. It has been really easy for us to do business with the United States. We speak the same language. We've been doing business with them for years. They're culturally similar, most of the time. And we have therefore not felt the urge to move our sights elsewhere. But more and more Canadian entrepreneurs are realizing that the world is a big place and it's full of opportunity. And at the same time, we are negotiating with South America and the Mercosur nations of Argentina and Brazil and Uruguay and Paraguay, and of course to the nations also of Southeast Asia. Once that agreement is fully implemented, Canada will have duty-free access to Asia-Pacific markets for 94% of agriculture and agri-food and 100% of fish, Jonathan, seafood, and forestry products being exported. This is after the CPTPP is fully implemented. But for me, it's not only about the numbers, it's about people. People like the Gein family who have been growing cherries in the Okanagan Valley since 1903. David Gein says they named their company Jealous Fruits because of the superior quality of their produce, all the other fruit is jealous. David says that if they couldn't export, jealous fruits would be more like the small cherry business his grandfather and great-uncle ran in the 1940s. Now they have 590 acres of land with 280,000 cherry trees, as well as a 30,000 square foot state-of-the-art sorting and packing facility. And as their business has grown, so has the number of jobs that they have created and their importance to the economy in the beautiful Okanagan. So the Asia-Pacific trade deal will make it easier and cheaper for the Guillen family to export to key countries. And there are many examples, and there will be more. We're also providing Canadian pork, which is important to me because in my province of Manitoba, we have one of the largest exporters of pork in the world, High Life. Canadian pork exports are projected to increase by $639 million under the CPTPP by 2040. So, as you can see, as you have in this video, Vancouver's Biba is only 5 years old, but it has transformed thousands of playgrounds around the world, including in the Asia-Pacific region in Australia and New Zealand. Do you know that they have 3,600 playgrounds that they have created? A small Canadian company with a footprint now which is around the world. The growth will be exponential. And when I was spending some time with them yesterday, I can tell you there's nothing more humbling than being taken through a program by a 7-year-old. And the 7-year-old was totally fluent in the program, in the game, in the rules around the game, and it was explained with an articulate sense of, I'm going to find those dinosaur bones. We have a lot to learn from 7-year-olds, and someday that young man, I'm sure, will rule a very important company. So we're at an inspiring moment for Canada. It's inspiring if we take advantage of it, if we use our entrepreneurial brilliance and our capacity to innovate. And whether you're a long-established company or just looking at expanding into export markets, now is your time. It's a time to celebrate these bridges that our countries have built. It's about the people working on video game graphics for Japan, or water purification systems in remote areas of Vietnam, or traveling to Australia to consult for the mining industry. It is the people that power these businesses that brings deals like our Asia-Pacific Agreement to life. Some of you will be fortunate enough later on today to be involved in our Trade Commissioners Open House. This is an unbelievable service. Trade commissioners around the world who offer their services free of charge, with all of that expertise, with all of that knowledge, sector by sector, region by region, that is made easily available to Canadian entrepreneurs. And we will talk about that this afternoon at the open house. So anyone who's considering exporting, I encourage you to contact the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service. Investigate these opportunities and programs. So with the CPTPP, we now have 14 trade agreements across 51 countries. We are the only G7 nation with a free trade agreement with the other 6. And together with our friends in the Asia-Pacific countries, we've come together to form a firm foundation where everyone can flourish and create opportunities for themselves and for their families. I want us to be inspired by today. I want us to be inspired by each other. The world is out there. The Canadian brand is respected and admired wherever we go. This is our moment. Let's seize it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Minister. And he reminded me of one thing. Actually, pigs do fly out of Winnipeg and Manitoba, and that they go to China and other and other parts of Asia, and it's really remarkable the type of business that's happening there. And also, I think, Minister, was very gracious of you to have that moment about Michael Wilson, and I just would like to add just a small thing, and this goes back a long way, and that's what happens when you've been around for a while, but at one point in time, Michael Wilson was the Minister of Industry as well as International Trade for a short period of time when we were brought back together, and that was him. Roll forward a few years, it was around 2006, he was appointed as Ambassador to the United States. And as a Director General for HR at the time, I was asked to brief him on the logistics and all the things that had to be done, which I thought was a bit weird at the time, but that was okay. He was the most gracious individual. Talking to a Director General was like, I don't know what to describe. I mean, Don Campbell knows him as well. I mean, he was really a delightful man, and it was really quite sad to see him pass away at a relatively young age at this time. But thank you, Minister. I think it just demonstrates the fact that we are a country where people mean something, and it's not about our political beliefs, it's really what's best for the country. Anyway, thank you, ministers. Thank you, Minister Carr. Thank you, Minister Champagne. Thank you, Minister Wilkinson. Thank you, George, Minister Chow, for your work. We are going to be taking the ministers away for a few minutes to have a photo. We will be coming back, and I just want to ask one question before we go into our seminar series. How many people here actually know what CPP will give them as business people? There are a lot of people who don't. That's why you have to go to the seminar after this. Anyway, thank you all very much. We'll be back. There's coffee to be had, and then we'll be moving into the foyer room right here. So thank you. In about 10, 15 minutes.